Hey everybody, my name is Craig Meredith. My wife Shara and I run the studio So Peculiar, and we released our first game, Bug and Seek, about 2.5, 3 years ago now, which is hard to believe. And bear with me as I try and share my screen. Well, it's running and thinking. In the meantime, Chris invited me to give this talk to just talk about the Web3 space, which i.e. the blockchain gaming and its connection to blockchain technology. And Shara and I gained experience with this about a year ago now. We were approached by a blockchain who wanted to put Bug and Seek onto it. That chain is called Somnia. I'm here to talk to you about Web3, blockchain, and games, and how we can bring redemption to this space. First, what it is and how we can, as Christian developers, redeem it. So Web3 has been overhyped, oversold, and sometimes even underestimated. And I'll go through kind of what it is, how it grew, how cryptocurrencies are tied to it, what NFTs are and their connection, games in Web3, what we've seen and experienced, and then what we learned ourselves in this process. So what is a blockchain? Once you strip away the hype, it is surprisingly simple. A blockchain is just a shared ledger that thousands of computers keep identical copies of, where every new entry is checked against everyone else's copy, and old entries can't be quietly rewritten. It's distributed, also known as decentralized. It doesn't sit on any single server. Every entry follows rules everyone can check, so everything on the ledger is verifiable. And it's append only. You can change, you can add new entries, but you cannot change old entries, which makes it extremely secure and vastly more secure than information sitting on servers. Give me a second. For an analogy to help explain what I mean by ledger, it's like a small town with one bank. In that case, all the money, all the transaction history, all the records sit with the one bank. You hope they don't lose it. You hope they don't get hacked. But if they do, it's all in one place. But if instead the town agreed that every household would keep their own copy of the bank's ledger, and any new entry has to match across most of the other copies before it's accepted, that is like the blockchain. No single household, no single entity can rewrite history or change data. No single fire can destroy the record. Trust is moved from a single institution to a system everyone can verify because everyone has a piece of it. Why have blockchains grown? There are a lot of good features to blockchain. They're very resistant to censorship. Again, because there's no single source of the information, it can't be easily changed or modified. It can't be changed or modified at all, really. And this is helpful in areas where there are authoritarian states or people have the ability to stifle information. It's smart contracts, which I'll talk about a little later, that run on blockchain allow you to create automatic functions that are especially useful in financial transactions involving things like escrow, where as soon as something happens, it's verified with the blockchain and it executes. So there's no more of this calling and waiting for somebody to wire money or a lot of the hurdles that you run into in like a real estate transaction, for instance. For public chains, which are the ones you're most familiar with, like Ethereum, Solana, anyone can build on top of it without asking permission. It's the same dynamic that made the web what it is, a lot of accessibility. It's global by default. A wallet in Lagos and a wallet in Nashville interact on the same rails, and there's no need for a bank as an intermediary. There's no need for an intermediary at all, although a lot of exchanges have grown up in connection with cryptocurrencies and NFTs. And there's verifiable scarcity. So for the first time on the internet, you can prove a digital thing is one of a kind, without a central authority having to vouch for it. Counterview to blockchain. Scams abound. It's probably what it's most well known for. Rug pulls, pump and dumps, fake projects. In a lot of cases, it's solutions chasing problems instead of solutions for problems. A lot of what we've seen of on-chain versions of existing products are worse in every way except they're on-chain, so at least you can verify the information. And there have been gross abuses of trust. Here, just like anywhere, there are human beings, but let me see and make sure I'm able to see if there are questions. And I encourage, if anyone has a question, just speak up. I don't know with this view, Chris, I'm not sure I can see the chat because I'm sharing my screen. So if someone has a question, just speak up and interrupt me. And I don't know this little graphic here. I haven't researched to see if Sam Bankman-Fried is trying to create a token while he's in prison, but he ran one of the most egregious abuses of financial trust in recent memory. What are cryptocurrencies? Why are they connected to blockchain? And what they're actually for. So typically, a blockchain relies on a token, a cryptocurrency, to help it function in a lot of ways. It's not always necessary. You can have a blockchain without a currency. It's typically seen when an institution uses its own blockchain and isn't trying to make it a publicly available chain. The most prominent of these is Walmart. Now runs all of its supplier relations through the blockchain to help trace origin of food and products. And I haven't dove deep enough to understand why it's done it, but they claim it's simplified a lot of their record checking from, a week to find out where spoiled lettuce with E. coli came from down to seconds or minutes. The practical reason why so many of these blockchains need tokens is because they need to pay people to do things. And it is a lot more efficient to create a new currency whole cloth than to have to pay people in cold hard cash. So running and securing the network costs money. You have the electricity, the servers that people are using, the time of the thousands of validators. So a validator, a server, is just a computer. Oftentimes people will volunteer to be a validator and run the blockchain on a computer that they just set aside at the house or wherever, or maybe run it on a server to be one of those many nodes that, so when something happens with the blockchain and it goes out to these thousands of nodes to verify accuracy, so a new something can be done. That's what these servers and computers are doing, and they need a reward for doing that. They don't do it for free. The token is how the network pays the workers, and without anyone being in charge. It's written into the code when it starts, so if you are a validator, you get a certain amount of tokens per transaction, per action you take. Users pay small fees in the token, validators earn the token, the system funds itself, in theory. Also in theory, the tokens align incentives. People who hold them benefit from the network success, the blockchain success, so they have reason to use it, build on it, and defend it. It's a powerful bootstrapping effect. It's how you build a network for nothing. Like I said, they're creating these tokens from nothing, paying people with them, and charging people in them to do things. But it's also where things get dicey. The same mechanism that aligns builders with users can become pure speculation when there's no real product underneath. A useful test to ask with a lot of these tokens is, would this token still matter if no one expected its price to go up? Where a lot of this has gone wrong with cryptocurrencies in the past is that the builders, the creators of the chain, the early investors chase the pumps. And so everyone's doing whatever they think will drive the price up so they can get out quickly and leave somebody else holding the token. As far as games are concerned, a lot of these chains will, to lure games onto their network and to lure players, pay in tokens. And so they're paying players to spend time on the game in these tokens. And the players you attract are often only there for the value extraction from the game. They're not there for any intrinsic motivation, any fun purpose. It's kind of like a job to them. Play the game and get paid. And much like a worker, when that financial incentive disappears, so do they. Often the early holders win and the late ones lose. And oftentimes everybody loses. And the pitch very often outruns the product. Very few cryptocurrencies have held their value, and every now and then you'll see one spike for various reasons, but very few have retained value. NFTs. What are NFTs and how do they fit in? So an NFT is a non-fungible token. A fungible token would be the currencies we just talked about. Every unit is interchangeable. No unit is unique per se. Whereas with an NFT, each one is unique and identifiable, and secure because of what we discussed earlier with the blockchain, and how secure the data is. It's like a deed, a ticket, a trading card. For purposes of games, often these are in-game items. You can buy a sword, and it's the only sword of that kind that exists. And very often it gives you a special benefit in the game. But again, you're paying often, converting real dollars into whatever the currency is on that chain to then use the currency to buy the item. NFTs in games, the pitch versus the reality. The pitch you'll often hear is that players truly own their own items. Items can move across games, so you can take your sword that you bought in game A, in theory, and use it in game B to also have a benefit. You can resell it on various markets. Because it is the only sword or one of a few, there's verifiable scarcity. So if the sword has value, people will want to buy it from you. And studios can earn royalties on resales. So there are ways to program into the chain that every time that item is resold, some percentage as a royalty flows back to the studio that created the sword. The reality that we have seen so far is ownership only matters if the game still runs, which is true of anything. That's not unique to Web3 and blockchain games. The cross-game interhop is mostly aspirational. It doesn't often occur. Resale markets exist, but can be thin and gassy. And by gassy, that just means high transaction costs on the chain. Usually to do something, you're paying what they call gas, which is you pay a small fee in the token. Royalties are increasingly bypassed by marketplaces. The royalties are becoming less and less common for those original creators. Most players don't want to have a crypto wallet. And then players certainly don't want to juggle many wallets. And the wallets is an issue I'll talk about in a little bit too. So games in Web3, what's actually possible and what's still hard or not feasible. So why do games keep trying to move toward Web3? As I mentioned briefly, there's the persistent ownership aspect. Items, achievements, and progress can outlive a single game or a single title. And tied to this, I'm not aware of it occurring anywhere yet, but in theory, a game can run directly off a blockchain. There are things called smart contracts that are coded into the chain itself. So the chain serves as the server, the host server. It's not feasible with games with a lot of action or movement. It's best for things that are turn-based or slow. Using our game, Bug and Seek, as an example, it would have even pushed the limit. But you can, in theory, run a game directly on a blockchain. And the benefit of that is, unlike traditional servers, if the studio hosting it goes bankrupt, the game dies. But if a game is written onto the blockchain itself, it lives forever. because that chain, lives forever in theory unless it dries up as well. So you could have a situation where a studio makes a game, writes it onto the chain, players are playing it, the studio goes bankrupt, or say it's a small team, somebody dies and they can't keep going. That game, at least in the last state it was created, will exist in perpetuity. Players can keep playing it. There's no additional cost to playing it unless there are side transactions, buying and selling things related to the game. In theory, so back to the list of why people are trying to move toward Web3, in theory, it creates a direct relationship with players because there's less middleman dependence, things like store fees, platform rules, server costs. There's a lot of hope of what I'll call the Pokemon card effect, and I think this drives the majority of people continually trying to make Web3 games work. Is NFTs create the potential for chain-specific items to gain value, similar to Pokemon cards or Magic cards. I think we all know how those work, but in theory, a digital item can function just the same. It has benefit in-game, and the greater its benefit in-game, or the greater its scarcity, the more valuable it becomes. Composability. Other developers can easily build on top of your game's data with mods, tools, sister games, etc., at least for public chains. And then your players can, in theory, be investors because you've been paying them in tokens to play it. Oftentimes, as the game succeeds, those who hold more of the coin associated with the game, or those who have gone further in the game, have more skin in it to see it succeed. What's still hard or difficult or unresolved about the Web3 space in gaming? Wallet creation, seed phrases, and signing transactions, none of it is normal gamer behavior. So as I said before, players are not fans of creating some kind of digital wallet so that they can interact with the game and purchase things in-game, purchase NFTs, etc. And then the seed phrases are kind of like a password for your crypto wallet, but they are extremely long and complicated oftentimes. And then for some transactions, you actually have to digitally sign something, which creates a lot of potential for fraud. Chains and associated actors are now trying to kind of abstract the wallet process out, so you just have to log in with an email. But that has a lot of problems because it often feels sneaky or deceptive. People think they're just logging in with an email like they do for anything else, and then are eventually prompted to connect that email to some kind of wallet. The performance ceiling for a lot of games and a lot of chains isn't where it could be yet. Most chains just can't handle real-time game data and game states. The one we worked with for Bug and Seek, one of the things they were hoping to achieve was a fast enough chain that it could handle real-time game states. Token incentives often kill the intrinsic motivation to play a game, i.e. fun. Players who are playing to extract value from the game are an entirely different player base than those who play games for enjoyment, and it often incentivizes speculation and gambling by the people who are playing. As I said, players are paid in tokens to play a lot of these games at the launch stage. They're also given prizes for various things, and those prizes often take the form of NFTs associated with the game, and that is where the speculation and gambling comes in. There is a lot of regulatory fog around Web3 games and blockchain right now, and there's a huge trust deficit. I think I'd be hard-pressed to really point to a positive Web3 game right now, except Bug and Seek and some of the others that our publisher Uprising has created and is using on the Somnia network. But if if you'll pardon my phrasing, swing a dead cat and hit a horror story of a Web3 game that ripped people off or ruined the game. So case study, bug and seek on the Somnia blockchain. Why Somnia specifically? That's a trick question. Shara and I weren't looking to get into Web3. We had no intention of being involved in blockchain, at least in connection with gaming. But we were approached by Somnia through our publisher Uprising, and I don't see him on here right now, but Ryan Waller, who is part of the Imladris community, is also a part of Uprising, the publisher. So Somnia is largely funded and managed by British entities and British individuals. Their hope was to create, they called it the first fully on-chain gaming experience. They may still get there, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's why we said yes to them when they approached us. For one, it's a proof of stake chain, which means it's much more energy efficient when it creates new blocks and transactions. You often hear about how Bitcoin is such an electricity hog, and it is because it's a proof of work chain. Somnia and its coin Somni are proof of stake, and they don't use any more energy than the server running Discord right now or the server that you're interacting with to play on Steam. Somnia promised heavy marketing, and marketing is our kryptonite. There were the game developer grants were significant and fair, we thought. When they approached us, they said they wanted to have one of, if not the first, family-friendly Web3 game, and that appealed to us because Bug and Seek is intended to be family-friendly, and we saw a lot of possibilities for how the game could be tied to Web3 in a way that was redeeming. The Web3 technology through the blockchain and some technology that our publisher Uprising was working on called Gamers Lab really intrigued us because it would have created more potential for educational uses for things like bug trading. Bug and Seek is a bug catching game. The bugs have different rarities. People in our Discord server would often lament their inability to catch certain bugs or find certain things. So it would have been nice to see players be able to interact and help each other out. And we thought it posed a lot of opportunity for building additional community. The technology would have allowed us to make Bug and Seek cooperative in a way that we couldn't on our own, and tied to the real world and real world event in ways that we could not achieve on our own. A couple examples of what we talked about was an event called Moth Madness that coordinated with March Madness. And we'd set goals like, if the player community can catch, 2,000 moths, and before March Madness ends, everybody wins some kind of prize. Flight of the Monarchs, I forget when it is, but when the monarch butterflies migrate from Canada down to Mexico and back, we would have had an event tied to real monarchs and something that pulled on community involvement. Things we learned along the way. The biggest surprise to us was just that some players hate Web3 and blockchain, no matter what it is or how it's presented. So on the pleasant side of things, the publisher we worked with, who served as our bridge to Somnia, was great. They understood our goals and created some impressive resources that would have enabled the community aspect and the educational aspects I talked about. The Web3 players we interacted with were extremely excited, friendly, encouraging. Nothing like the horror stories we were told by our current player base, which brings me to the harder than expected aspect. We decided, because of the reputation of blockchain and NFTs in the past, and we had seen recently several games that tried to involve them without saying it up front, kind of hiding that fact till people had already started to engage and get invested. So we decided we would be very upfront and honest and tell the players that we currently had, hey, we're releasing this new version that's going to be on Web3. It doesn't affect what you're doing with Steam or Switch. If you want to play it, great. If you don't, great. We're going to open the Discord server to some new players who are coming through that angle. And people erupted, a very small number of vocal players. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of accusation and a small but effective review bombing campaign. During the process, too, the crypto market tanked, which then caused Somnia to not be able to provide some of the expected levels of support that we had hoped for. So the player reaction and just the dependency on the crypto market were things we had not expected. What we would do differently, we would have handled the announcement differently and waited till much later in the process, because where things currently stand, Bug and Seek is up in Web3 form. You can play it on itch.io. It is interacting with the Somnia blockchain, but it looks like we're never going to do NFTs. So much of the uproar that we caused was needless because their concern never came to fruition. And we would have more rigorously evaluated using NFTs as opposed to other Web3 features. I'm going to share just a few of the reviews we got. You know, the nice thing is, even though they were review bombing us, they're often complimentary. You know, this top one says they loved the game so much they went to make their first review, learned about the NFT involvement, but still gave us the negative and said, please reconsider. So an interesting thing to us in all this also was we made a game about bugs. We think they're interesting, they're fascinating, they're an aspect of God's creation. We never went out there and beat the drum of environmental activism. You know, we weren't appearing in YouTube videos with Greta Thunberg, rending our garments over harm to the environment. But because we had made a game about bugs and nature, and some of the descriptions of bugs talked about biodiversity, everyone just assumed the game was an environmental warrior. And we think we should be good stewards of the environment. Obviously, God created it and gave it to us, but we just viewed it as a game about bugs. We weren't out here to change anyone's mind on the environment or anything. But so many of the players who were upset with us said that what we were doing betrayed the environmental principles of the game. I think some of it was born of ignorance about what blockchain actually is, and that not everything is Bitcoin. But there you go. And unfortunately, with the number of people who are finding these reviews helpful or checking them, these will always show up pretty highly on our Steam page. But, aside from a brief or tense couple weeks when this first erupted, everybody's moved on, I think. By the grace of God, the game continues to do all right. So for us as Christian developers, how can we redeem the Web3 space? More than most, it's filled with just wreckage and horror stories. So, I'm curious to hear what other people think too, but for us, it's speculation versus fun. As I've talked about, Web3 typically pays players to extract their time until a certain momentum is reached, essentially until they're hooked enough. The goal is get them in, pay them, and get them to start buying into the sunk cost bias. Very rarely are the games designed to be fun instead of get their hooks into them, so to speak. But what if we design games to be fun, like we do, and then also figured out ways that players could invest in it that weren't predatory, be it through time, money, involvement, community. As I said before, Web3 offers a way to make games collaborative and tied to the real world in a way that small developers and teams might not otherwise be able to achieve. Honest dealing, disclosure, transparency, creating a real product over a lot of empty promises. honesty in Web3 is pretty much at rock bottom, so it's not, redemption isn't a heavy lift here. Just telling the truth goes a long way. And provide real value. If a player is spending money, make sure they're getting something of value in the game items, the gameplay, etc., not just a speculative item that could go to zero at any moment. Okay, I can see the chat again. Does anybody have any questions, anything they'd like to add, any points of clarification? Okay, so I'll answer Chris's question about would a coin be useful even if it didn't go up in value. Yes, they can. Uh, if what you are doing, if you have things to do to interact with the blockchain, so if you want to write a smart contract into the chain or exchange something, an item or the token itself, you have to pay the gas I talked about earlier, you have to pay a fee. So even having the coins is valuable to allow you to do things and interact with the chain, to program things into the chain, to execute a smart contract, to do other things. So the value, if it's not tied to monetary value increase, if the chain is very functional or helpful in a lot of ways, then the token still retains value because it allows you to transact with the chain, if that makes sense. Yes. Yes. So as long as Somnia exists, everything from Bug and Seek that is on the chain will continue to exist. But the game is not fully on chain. What we currently have up is still relying on servers, and it's just storing the player's save files to the chain. So it wouldn't be a situation where the game will run indefinitely, even if we go out of business. But if Somnia goes out of business, I'm not sure. It would depend on if the chain continues to function without their involvement. I think it probably could, but I'd have to dig deeper into how Somnia is structured and how they set up ownership of the chain for the long term. I don't see NFTs as fundamentally wicked. They're just a digital asset, a digital item. The problem that people have gotten into is very often the NFT is sold or hyped for the purpose of having monetary value and never achieves that. Or so I'll use the example of there's a game called Pixelmon. I'm not sure where it's at now, but it was a very hyped early Web3 game. I mean, you can tell from the name, it's similar to Pokemon. It was the OG Pokemon ripoff before Pal World came into being. But as part of that, they sold NFTs that were creatures, and you couldn't see what you were getting. You just paid an extreme amount. I forget if it was, I want to say it was several $100s for an egg, and it would hatch and show you a character. And when they finally hatched to reveal the NFT character that people had paid for, they were really ghetto pixel art. Like just terrible pixel art, very shoddy quality. Some of them were so bad that they actually became valuable as meme NFTs. So, all right. Yeah, but those were very few. Most of them lost value just because they were so horrible. The game, last I had checked, never launched, so people paid for a character in a game that wasn't functional, and ended up owning artwork that was not great to begin with. So the problem with NFTs is they're very often issued as speculative items in the hopes and the temptation to players that they will gain value, but they are tied to the crypto market, which is very unsteady. I can't think of the right word. Volatile, very volatile. So when they actually function in a game and the game itself is playable, there's really no issue. And it's a good way to create unique in-game items so that you don't have, 100 other people who have the skin, or really as many people as want a skin as can purchase it. Like too much in between player experience. Would agree with Mr. Magneto. It's oftentimes games are not designed to take your experience into account. No, you're fine. I'm not on Imladris enough to remember who's who with their handle and their real name, Eric. But yeah, I would agree. A lot of these games were made way too complicated and intended to just be grindy and very obviously keep extracting your time or your money to keep going and feed you things like the token or NFTs so that you'd feel invested in it when it was never really a game to begin with. They just haven't. Okay. I just saw your comment, Chris. They just they haven't been designed with players in mind and player experience. The question that I just answered was, Eric said, it sounds almost like there is too much in between player experience, too many things to consider rather than just a quick play experience. And I would agree. Chris says, can you help me understand the distinction between a coin token and a redemptive NFT? Like, could we create NFTs that are tradable but not limited to a volatile coin market? That is a good question. So coins and tokens are, you have to have, to be an NFT, you have to be tied to some kind of token. Because to create the NFT, you write it into a chain, somebody's blockchain. So it's just about every blockchain you can think of does have its own currency, its own coin. So I'll use Ethereum and Ether as an example. And those, I use Ethereum and Ether too because they are going to be more stable than a lot of the other chains and coins out there. Because it's been around so long, it is the most popular chain for smart contracts and executables and other functions. It's very useful. So it's not just a digital asset. It's a very functional chain and coin. So, and once you create it and tie it to a coin, you can still trade it. You can convert most tokens to another token, but there really isn't a way to create an NFT that's not still anchored to a coin, a token of some kind. And all coins, all tokens are going to be tied to the volatility of the coin market. But again, the older and more stable a chain and its token are, the less they're subject to the wild, go to zero moments that a lot of these chains and coins have seen. The flip side of that is it's more expensive to engage with Ether and Ethereum. You're paying more in gas, but you get that stability. I'll read your question, Chris. He said, I think my biggest hesitation has been that I haven't seen a compelling reason to use the chain instead of just a database. However, as we've been getting Etherlight back up and running, we see that all historical user data was lost forever. So I am starting to see, at least in that case, if that data was on a blockchain somewhere, at least we could reconnect to it. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. When I thought of the ether light, preparing this and talking about how if the more of a game you have on the chain, the more of a game is permanent. And if you can get it fully on chain, then it pretty much lives forever. Like if it's on Ethereum, it's not going anywhere. So it will live there without any server costs and things of that nature. The problem is you would have all the player data, but I think the Etherlight would be too robust to run fully on chain at this point. Interesting. Chris says, in the terminology of the redemptive frame, we say the line runs from unethical to ethical to redemptive. And the typical distinction from ethical to redemptive is sacrifice. Do you see places where developers could meaningfully sacrifice in this situation? That's a good question. I mean, it depends on what kind of sacrifice you're referring to. There's the financial sacrifice of absorbing a lot of the costs that players might otherwise play. There's the time sacrifice of how much you invest of yourself into the game, how it's created, how you interact with the players. So it really depends, but I think there are a lot of areas for it. My caution on some of the it's pretty small. It depends on the chain. I think with Somnia, they were working real hard to make it as low gas as possible. So I want to say it was like fractions of a cent per transaction. And I'm blanking on the right term for it, but similar to an API call, basically fractions of a cent per API call. So it wasn't much. Others are going to be more expensive, and it also depends on what you're doing. But it's not a lot. At one point, Somnia was talking about the volume of transactions per second they were able to accomplish, and it was an extremely large number. I want to say in the billions. So yeah, Chris asked, in terms of US dollars, how much does gas cost, which I just answered. And then, so a developer could conceivably cover that gas cost and be meaningfully sacrificial. I think so. It's the cost to interact with a blockchain for a game, to have a Web3 game, I think is going to be lower than, your Steam fees, your Epic fees, your Apple fees, things of that nature. So you could go a long way toward covering the costs and still come out ahead compared to traditional gaming avenues. One thing I'll add about the redemptive frame, and also, so Chris asked, does Steam allow blockchain games in their system? They do not. There is no Web3 on Steam, which made it very frustrating to see all the review bombing on Steam talking about NFTs, because it has nothing to do with Steam whatsoever. Going back to what I was saying before, I think Web3 will introduce you to, our experience with Web3 at least is that it drew a much more international player base than we had seen, because Bug and Seek was only in English. We didn't localize it to other languages, but a lot of the players, we did an AMA and a few other things that I can't remember what they're called, where we had the opportunity to interact with players and talk about the game. And a significant portion of them, I got the sense, were from outside the US and outside even English-speaking countries. I think China has a very large Web3 player base, for instance, and Indonesia. So it will, one area where it offers a redemptive use is that it's going to introduce you to a much broader array of players than you'll typically see just doing a game on Steam or Nintendo Switch or even Apple. And that was interesting for us and a highlight. Like I said, the players we met and interacted with were wonderful, lovely people. I couldn't understand the lingo they were using because we're still new to the Web3 space. So my slang usage has grown tremendously. And during some of these events, we'd be trying to answer questions while I'm on the side Googling what does GM fam and some other terms mean. But it was a very good experience and really good players to interact with. Chris asked, you said the blockchain version of Bug and Seek, we call it Bug and Seek, the Expedition Edition, is on itch.io. Somnia does not have their own store right now. They have several places where you can purchase things tied to the chain, like NFTs or other things, but as of right now, the Expedition Edition is only available on itch.io. I'm not sure what our publisher is going to do with it in the future. There may be other avenues. We'll kind of have to cross that bridge and see. Scott asked, did you discover selling at a lower price in poorer regions if it was worth it? I don't know that I can answer that based on our Somnia experience, because it was free to play. Should have mentioned that before. It's free to play on itch. You can pay to unlock the full version. I'm not sure what the data on that was, if that would be with the publisher. But I do believe a lower price in poorer regions would be worth it. And I'm not sure if you see that function already in places like Steam. They'll often suggest what to set your price at once you peg it to $2 or things of that nature. And Chris says, last call, people. If you have a question, now is the time. And feel free to email me, message me on Discord if you have any questions. I know I've rushed through a whole lot there to get to it, some of which I'm even still wrapping my head around. So I'm happy to answer questions and work things out. All that you've learned, do you expect you do a blockchain game again? Probably not. I don't think we would, because the games we typically make, I don't think lend themselves real well to at least what typical blockchain, I'll call them Web3 players, are looking for. And just, we were kind of soured by that negative player interaction. But I don't know. Never say never. I would be willing to share my slides as well. Chris asked if I would share my slides, so happy to. Eric, I am not sure about the performance limitations, because it varies chain to chain. And unfortunately, Cher is not with me to give a more technical answer. The problem for Web3 is just, I think it's not to the point yet where games can really run fully on chain. I think new chains are being created and will be created in the future that come closer to achieving that capability. So I'm not sure how to answer it, other than in my very limited understanding, it's not gotten to the point with technology yet where writing the code essentially into blocks and then having the data transferred to these nodes to the block and get verified and get sent back is fast enough to accommodate most games. But It's a problem that's being tackled in every day, and I expect we'll get there at some point. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, thanks everybody for attending. I hope it was helpful and enjoyable. Like I said, I tried to cover a lot there, and I hope in the process I didn't just, um, you know, go too fast.